Welcome to the Dance Centre podcast. I am your host, Claire French, and I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, also known as Vancouver, Canada. I'll be talking to dancers, choreographers and other members of the dance world here on the West Coast to find out more about their creative work and practices and to discuss what it means to us to be dance professionals today. Thanks for joining us. Idan Cohen was born and raised in Kibbutz Mizrah, Israel. Trained first as a classical pianist, he later studied theatre and fine arts at Israel's art colony in the Negev desert, graduating with distinction. At age 20, Cohen joined the world-renowned Kibbutz Contemporary Dance Company, KCDC, where he danced for 7 seasons under artistic director Rami Be'er and Yehudit Arnon. Since 2005, Cohen has been creating, performing and teaching internationally as an award-winning choreographer and opera director. His acclaimed productions, Bellini's Capuletti e Monteschi, Teatro Massimo, Take This Waltz, and Gluck's Orfeo and Eurydice exemplify his signature fusion of opera and contemporary dance. Cohen is the artistic director of Naissance Opera and Dance, a Vancouver-based company devoted to bold, human, interdisciplinary storytelling. He holds BA and MA degrees in choreography from the Jerusalem Academy of Music and Dance, is a member of Opera Canada and the Dance Centre, Vancouver. Idan Cohen, the fabulous Idan Cohen, is with me today, artistic director of Naissance Dance Opera and Dance, Dance and Opera. Which way round is it, Idan? Naissance Opera and Dance.
Naissance Opera and Dance, yes.
And Naissance, I am saying that right. You don't know how many times I say it and I say, is it Naissance? Is it Naissance? I'm going to ask Idan how to say this. So lovely. And so we have lots to talk about in terms of dance and opera. And first I would like to talk with you, Idan, about your dual track, because I believe, well, it's very much in your work, the contemporary dance and opera combination, but also because of your classical training, classical musical training. And I wonder if we could talk a little bit about where you are at with your classical music and your opera and your dance and how those things are fused together in your work or how they overlap. And then also maybe at the same time, a little bit about your training in those areas. So we have a kind of context from which we'll take this conversation. And welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. You know, opera, if we look at it historically, it's that idea of multidisciplinary work of art. So basically a performance that combines all the arts. So we have theater, obviously, music, dance, and the visual arts. So we would have costumes and sets that are thought of as a part of the concept of the piece or as a part of storytelling. In my background, as you've mentioned, I am a classically trained pianist as a child, growing up in the kibbutz in Israel. And I moved on actually to study in my high school years. I studied both theater and fine arts in an art school in the south of Israel, in a beautiful place that is called Mitzpe Ramon. And I started dancing rather late. I started dancing when I was 19. I did not join the army. I didn't take part. I didn't do my army service. But I returned to the kibbutz that I grew up in. And I did social service when I was working with children, helping them, children who had difficulties doing school chores, like behavior issues inside the classroom. And the kibbutz allowed me to take an afternoon class. And I chose to take a dance class. And I had a teacher who really believed in me and really supported in me. Her name is Melanie Berson. She was a solist for Batsheva Dance Company, and she's still my mentor today. So even when I'm in Vancouver, I always send her videos, and we have lots of phone calls where I would share my ideas or thoughts with her, she really became, such an influential person in my life. And I was dancing with the Kibbutz Contemporary Dance Company since I was 20 until I was 27. But I always felt that my true passion or my true calling is to create work. And I opened my dance company that was then based in Tel Aviv. And I ran that dance company for almost 20 years. And it was pure dance, pure contemporary dance. We toured a lot. My work has even won a few international and national awards, which was, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, I felt that the canvas of contemporary dance, kind of the structure, the economic structure of the way we create was a little limiting for me. I wanted to think bigger. I felt that I always think about sets and costumes and the visuality and theatricality, and I love addressing the past more than the future.
Ah, yeah.
It's interesting because, you see in contemporary dance very often that there are those who imagine the future, what the future would look like, how people would move or how they would act and behave, and those who address the past and or the reality and react to it. And I always went back into the past. I love cultural monuments and I love addressing those and comparing them into our reality with our reality today. So for an example, one of my first actually full-length piece in Israel was I did Swan Lake, and it was for only 3 female dancers, and the lake was formed of tomatoes. Mm-hmm. And kind of that idea of addressing something as monumental as a Swan Lake, that everyone has their own idea of what Swan Lake is, right? It's so embedded in our culture. And then doing something very contemporary with it, but having that, depth of layers of what we expect to receive and then what we actually see on stage. That was always really interesting for me. And in that stage of my life, and just before I moved to Vancouver, I felt that opera is actually the perfect canvas for that. Because the opera world still allows or even demands a bigger concept. There are sets, there are costumes, you have a lot of people on stage. You actually have a way more diverse group of bodies on stage in opera than you would often in dance. Mm-hmm. And it just felt like the right place for me to go.
Mm-hmm. I love all of this, Idan. I think just in terms of, because the visual or the visuality even, I think you used that word, but of the tomatoes. And at the same time that there's a risk factor, a soft risk, with the idea that the stage might even be changed by the bodies within that environment. You're setting up a relationship between the tomato and the feet of the dancers or the bodies of the dancers. And also immediately suggesting to an audience, or not really suggesting, but asking them to look at this work differently and in that kind of Gesamtkunstwerk way, definitely in that total theatre way. Like this is you will see relationships on stage here between disciplines, like immediately. I think that is really wonderful. And I also really appreciate you saying this. I think we'll get into this later as well, but not the necessarily limitations of contemporary dance. I am interested in whether opera gives you a narrative that you can play off, or a kind of plot structure that also allows for you to bring in phrasing and things like that you might have from your classical music background and the pictorial. But I've always been fascinated by that with your work. I've always felt like there's a sense of understanding where you are coming at an idea, but that you are not. There's something about the context and the narrative and the plot and all of those things being a reference point for you to know that you can rely on as you make other decisions. Is that fair to say? Is there something in that for you?
Absolutely. I think it's really a question of looking at things through multiple angles and diversifying and enhancing the possibilities that we have when we address a subject matter. So if we are actually going back to the Swan Lake thing, it's taking an expectation. So, the idea of what Swan Lake should be and should look like, and the idea of, the romantic ballerina. And then the tomatoes came from this idea that when we're insulted by something or when we're unhappy with something that we see on stage traditionally, the audience would throw tomatoes at the performers. And then there was this idea, what if we bring that on stage and they are actually trying to perform, failing at times, and throwing tomatoes at each other, which is, something that then to me is very well connected to the pleasures and anxieties of being an artist, and in some ways also to the violence that is in our culture, in our sector. And when we take that way of thinking into opera, and we take a story, and operas, there are still operas being created at the moment, right, in multiple languages, and it is a living, thriving discipline. But most of the opera that I work on, most of the operas that I direct are classical. And in that way, there's an opportunity to take a story and see how it recreates itself again and again and again through the generations. So my most recent big production at Teatro Massimo in Palermo in Italy was Capuletti Montecchi. So that's the story of Romeo and Giulietta. And one of the things that we did was Giulietta's room was created by infinity mirrors to reflect that idea that we see Giuliettas over and over and over again throughout, history. That story recreates itself. There will always be, or, maybe not always, let's be. As long as we can remember, there are still rivalries, and then young people who maybe believe in a better future or maybe naively in love and being harmed or persecuted by their families or by society at large. So this I find fascinating, addressing these stories and bringing contemporary perspectives in multiple layers to those stories that we all know and have been with us for sometimes millennial.
Yeah, and it seems like you have a really clear kind of relationship to both the premise of the piece that you're working on, and that's kind of a guide for you as you continue to work on it in all these multiple layers. So I feel like it's supporting the intuition that kicks in and all of the different elements as you collaborate with people and work on those. It's so exciting. It really is. Just the way you're talking about it is exciting to me. So could you talk a little bit about maybe what each art form gives you? Because you are still bringing all of these art forms, and you do choreograph contemporary dance on dancers in your operas and choreograph on the other members of the cast within the opera. And so obviously there is something that the contemporary dance, a language, or you as a choreographer is kind of, you're using that across as opposed to in a section of, an opera. So I wonder if you might just kind of riff with us on maybe what each art form has given you for your work, which I think you've talked about a bit, but gives to you, like Idan, as the person and the artist.
One of the things that you see when you go to an opera performance that has dance in it is, if you think of it as an image, you basically see those who cannot speak, which would be the dancers, and often those who cannot move, which would be the singers.
Yeah.
And there's something really interesting because, when we watch a performance, we basically watch recreation of society. We see a dynamic between a group of people that have different liberties, that are allowed different things. There's hierarchy there. As a director, sometimes that is my job, to guide the audience through the things that I want to highlight and things that I want for them to still see, but be in the background, be in the shadows, be something that is, sometimes you scream and sometimes you whisper. And in order to bring forward what you want to say, you want to have access to both. And I think that in every type of performance, in every type of art making, we are addressing, whether it's conscious or subconscious, we are addressing these forces that are in there. So when we dance in contemporary dance and there's music in the background, whether it's live or if it's recorded, the music is its own entity and we are forming a relationship with it. And I think that very often, some of us are aware of that relationship. For some of us, it's subconscious. We just react to it. But I think that when you really look at that dynamic, you can learn a lot of things about what you're presenting to the audience. So I would say that when I create contemporary dance, I usually would rather have live music on stage because I want the music to have that voice, literally, to have that voice, and I want the dancers, the performers, to be able to react and live alongside that voice, and not for that voice to be muted. And it's the same when I work in opera. I want movement and body language, and sometimes if it's the principles of or the chorus, sometimes it would just. I mean, I don't have to explain to you or to any dance artist and lover of the importance of movement in order to express emotions, sometimes trauma. Sometimes, inherited trauma or.
Yeah.
And when you work in building or creating characters that would resonate on stage, that's such a significant part of the work. So yeah, in opera, when the dancers are taking part of the stage, that is more than just, an aperitif, or more than just, those little dance parts that are an amusement between the big opera numbers. When they are really present in everything that is happening, I think there's a very unique effect that we get out of it that is really emotional and alive. It's often, if you think of a tableau, kind of the Baroque tableau coming to life in a contemporary way, tableau being, a moving, living picture.
Living image. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
image. Something that is still, that comes to life. And I think that is a good way throughout the history of opera of addressing dancers and dance.
Mm-hmm. And then I can't imagine that you would be interested in ever creating something within just the one discipline again. That doesn't exist, does it, for you?
I don't know. I am now, for the first time, someone engaged me to direct theater, direct a new play that is being created.
That's exciting.
It is very exciting, and they saw my opera work, and they saw some of my dance work. But sometimes for economical reasons, they can't afford dancers nor musicians or stage. So this is theater, and I love challenging myself, and I never say no to anything that I find challenging. And challenges is also something that you create. So I would assume, and I've been in situations in recent years when I would be commissioned to create a dance piece for a company that nowadays in some countries royalties for music can be really expensive. So they would want to use maybe a recorded soundtrack and so on. I love creating dance, and I love creating, I love being an artist. I never say no to any interesting opportunity. So,
Well, this is also the difference between what you as an artistic director can realize and, kind of immerse yourself in. And then there's the artist, Idan Cohen, isn't there, who is, any
yeah.
opportunity, and the creative, which is where you can, I sometimes call some of the work I take and the work I'm asked to do as service choreography, because so many of the components are already decided, and then I am having to work within those. And I don't necessarily see them as constraints as a negative thing at all. They are the things that I'm working with and putting together, and I'm being asked because of those things. And so I find that very exciting. And then sometimes the liberation from all of that and having to come up with everything because I have an itch to create something that isn't that is it takes me such a long time. But for a long time, I've almost compartmentalized the different responsibilities, if you like, and they're closing in, which is a really beautiful thing. So I feel like in that way I'm kind of blossoming into that. I'd love to come back. I think I always talk about this with you in the end, but I'd love to come back to that a little bit later around the artistic direction part. But I'm very excited for you in that regard, and I'm very excited to see what you do with that. But also, I think the process will be so rewarding as well, and I think there's going to be some very interesting places where you discover your love of storytelling in a different way as well. So that's wonderful. Would that be in Canada? Because I'm also interested in your decision to come to Canada, and maybe we could move a little bit, segue just to that, into whether you came to Canada as a work-related opportunity, or how have you found work opportunities here? Did they bring you here? And then I'm wondering a little bit around whether your niche brought the work opportunities to you in Canada, or whether you provide the niche, which is already clear for all of us and the listeners that you are going to provide a very particular niche to any project that you're asked to work on. So why Canada? Very glad you're here. And what brought you?
First of all, yeah. So happy to be here. I feel very privileged, to call Vancouver my home. I moved to Vancouver. My partner at the time, his sister, has been living in Vancouver for many, many, many years. And we both knew that we wanted to leave Israel for different reasons that had to do, both personal reasons. I was working at the States quite a lot during those years. And also for political reasons. We wanted to find a place that we would feel more comfortable and safe conducting our lives. The first person that has met with me was Myrna from the Dance Centre.
Yeah.
And I have to say on that note, that Myrna has been throughout the almost 10 years now that I've been in Vancouver, one of the most supportive and generous people to me, both personally, as a friend. Myrna has always been there as someone that would support me both as a human being and as an artist. Myrna and the Dance Centre. So I think this is a really significant and a great way to start. Then I emailed a bunch of companies and a bunch of schools, but the dance center gave me an opportunity with a small residency. And Leslie Telford, who then worked at Arts Umbrella and ran her prep program, invited me to work with a group of beautiful young dancers. And I reached out to Vancouver Academy of Music, and there was a beautiful conductor there. Her name was Kathleen Allen, choral conductor, and we workshopped parts of Orfeo ed Euridice, which was the opera that I was working on at the time. And at the day that we had the presentation, we had, a free, open to the public presentation at the Ferries. Kathleen on Davy Street met with Leslie Dalla, who's a beautiful musician, conductor, working with Vancouver Opera for years. And by chance, Leslie came into the theater and saw our presentation. And a few days later, I received an email from Vancouver Opera saying that they've heard about this thing that I was doing and that they're interested in having a conversation. So it's just a fun story to tell because, there are some good people along the way who would pick up a meeting and would look at your videos and the things that you've done, because I arrived to Vancouver as someone who has some experience as an artist, but at the same time, no one really knew who I am. It's not like, anywhere you go, like doors are automatically opening for you, right? You have to open those doors with your own bare hands. Sometimes you have to knock really hard.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to do it from a distance, but you have to prise those open.
Absolutely.
You're actually having to do the grunt work. Yeah, that's very true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was a very humbling experience to almost start from scratch after the career that I've had, but it was also a very rewarding journey in that sense.
Yeah, wonderful. So it was almost like not exactly a reinvention, but there was a kind of a new wave in your career, it seems, like that you'd already started by moving anyway. I do feel like sometimes this is like an alignment. There is something about a timing that we can't explain that has a kind of magnetic pull that creates a kind of alignment. So I think that sounds very exciting to me in terms of how you were kind of welcomed almost, and your work was welcomed, and you were starting to find people who wanted a piece of it, right? Because that's the other thing, is they suddenly want a piece of Idan Cohen and that aesthetic and that thing and want to get involved. So how did you find that, the momentum of that? I know you do have a lot of work in Vancouver. The nature of the funding and all of those things, as you've mentioned, means that the ebb and flow is sometimes more of an ebb. But you've managed to maintain an international career as well. And so could you talk a little bit about where you are at with that? Because right now, I'm in Vancouver. I'm about to go to the UK. You're in Israel, and you're coming back to Vancouver, I believe. So we are both kind of moving across oceans. But could you talk a little bit about how you are either making that work or how you found that since you've been based in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I moved to Canada, a lot of people in our community in Vancouver has asked me, why here? We're so isolated and it's so hard to connect to the rest of the world, where Israel at the time, now the situation is pretty dire, but at the time, Israel was way more connected to the scene in Europe, and a lot of Israeli artists. I mean, we've been having a lot of success in the international dance scene. And things have changed since I've moved to Canada, but I think it's also because my work has grown bigger in scale.
Yeah.
And when the work is bigger in scale, then the touring possibilities, and also I would say my interest has shifted.
Yeah.
I still work internationally, so I've been working quite a lot in Australia in recent years, and obviously in Europe and my visits to Israel. But it's different because my interests are a little different, and the work is a little bigger, and it requires either bigger dance companies or opera houses.
Yeah.
In that sense. I also find, where when we created Take This Waltz in 2022, which is an operatic piece with contemporary dance. So Ted Littlemore is dancing in it, and Daniel Okulich, who's a really well-known Canadian baritone who's based in Berlin. And we have musicians on stage, and that piece has really received a lot of praise and is quite successful. And we've managed to tour it this past winter in BC, and we're now preparing for a big national and international tour of the work. And one of the things that I found were the challenges of touring work in Canada, the challenges of funding. The structure is very different than the structure I'm familiar with, but it is absolutely possible. And, this takes us back to the economy. You said something that I really appreciated, and about the time that it sometimes takes for an idea or a piece to simmer and then come into fruition. And I really believe in that. It's like usually the time that it takes from when the idea just started or when we first applied for the first grant and until the work is on stage. And sometimes we keep refining the work after its premiere. That happens as well. Yeah. But at the end, if you do take the time, and if you do, that's always funny.
If you do
the legwork and you apply and you find your partners and you find like-minded people who are passionate about the work, then the quality of the work will be better and it will have a longer life, which is something that I think is really important for our sector and our economy. Because when we get used to receiving funding for work that is presented only once or twice, there's something inherently wrong in the system and in the structure. It just doesn't make sense for us to invest so much time and resources for work that won't have a longevity. So this is something that I'm very mindful of how do I create something that has a production value and that would be appealing for a variety of audience members or art lovers. So not just those who enjoy a classical music concert or not just those who enjoy contemporary dance performance, but art lovers as a whole that can gather in the space and enjoy, a multifaceted, multidisciplined performance.
Yeah, and I feel like you're talking about scale here as well, and with that scale comes responsibility, increased responsibility for what you're talking about. If you're working at that scale, more eyes and more money are involved, and I feel like that speaks to a sense of an artist's responsibility as a citizen. So I love that, and I don't mean like, and you've differentiated between improvised performances or concerts that are maybe a bit more like a fleeting improvisatory. That's their goal, and that's how they connect to people. So I'm not talking about that, but at the scale that you're talking at, there's a responsibility for those kinds of budgets and those kinds of ideas and that kind of time, which I think is just a really lovely connection, which speaks also to the importance of taking time, because you're asking everybody to invest in a scale much bigger than our everyday. Well, depending on the day.
I feel that it's a conversation that we need to have, not a literal conversation, but a conversation, an exchange of ideas that we have with the public or with the audiences. In that sense, even when I love the work of my dear friend Peter Bingham and Idam. And, Peter and Reina, they invest so much thought in the work and they rehearse so hard and they have collaborators that they've been working with and, strengthening those relationships with these performers for years. And then you get something, even if it's a very different discipline or a very different approach to art making from what I do, that same level of thought, that same level of depth, that same level of consideration. And it doesn't matter if you do it inside your own home and you go into the studio and you bring that in, or if you do it in, a grand theater stage. That's not what it's about, right?
Yeah, and I think there is an element of observation that across the two, like as I read that, there's a sensitivity and time devoted to observation of the working process and of the practice.
Yeah.
It's a part of the practice, which I think that's what I've learned from both of you in a way, but also from, that's becoming my way forward. That is the thing that is kind of supporting me, if you like, and sometimes a shadow and sometimes screaming at me. The whisper, what did you say? The whisper and the shout.
Right.
Yeah, it's both.
Right.
It's both. Yeah. It's really, really good. So are you still a performer, Idan? Do you still perform?
I am absolutely not. No.
Absolutely not.
I realized very early in my career that performing is not my jam. I was a very anxious performer. I never loved being seen on stage. I really enjoy creating work. I really enjoy the creative process. Even like when I'm not on stage, performances are not my favorite part of the gig.
Yeah. Wow. Cool.
I love the process. The performance, sometimes, you would find me hiding in the bathroom or under a table somewhere.
Yeah.
Not my favorite time. No.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I've just gone back to performing for myself in the past, like couple of years. So it's also informing my choreographic work on other people and my group work again. It's really revived all of that and ignited a new thing in me. So that's I'm very happy for that. But I just felt like I was missing something, actually. I was missing a connection and a definition in my work that I realized I could only find by embodying certain aspects of it again and then freeing myself from that. So in some ways it was a little bit like I was in the shadow of my own work and I wasn't I wasn't bringing something into the light as far as I could, and I hadn't quite realized that aspect.
Yeah.
One of the questions I'd proposed to you that we don't have to necessarily get into here, because I'd love to talk a little bit more about what's happening at the Dance Centre and what's coming up. But just this idea of whether there's any contention between contemporary dance and opera for you, but just to reflect on that a little bit and give a little bit of context, because I felt that. I felt in myself a little bit of contention around how I might present my work, and also whether or not it is, and whether I want it to be called contemporary dance, whether that is what I'm making. Yeah.
It's so important, and I love that journey where, you go back to your own body, vessel, as a performer to realize, or to ignite a certain passion. And again, it's kind of, for me, talking about that spiraling journey of going back to the past and revisiting it in our contemporary bodies. One of the things that I would address in that tension, I would say, between opera and contemporary dance, or even in anything that has classicism and then contemporary in it. We often see it, between ballet and different styles of contemporary or the more somatic work. One of the things that I always find disturbing, I would use that word, really disturbing.
Strong word, yeah.
Is how it is important for some of us to define ourselves through the things that we do not like.
Right.
It's very easy for someone to go see a contemporary dance performance and say, "Oh, I hate contemporary dance." And to go see an opera and say, "Oh, that's boring or outdated," or it's too easy. It's just too easy. And in a way, for me, if I even think of my experience in life, and that also connects, I think, to what you've spoken of in, reconnecting to yourself as a performer, the research of trying to understand what unites us and what fascinates us and what is real to us, as opposed to how we define ourselves according to those who we do not agree with, is one of the biggest problems today, I think, both in our sector and in our society. But this is something that I think we should all, we should reconsider the way we look at other disciplines, and we should find more common grounds.
So, coming up at the Dance Centre, I'm talking to you now, like, targeted month to speak to you about your up-and-coming project and your residency with the Dance Centre. And there's, many, many other things we could talk about. But I think we'll just bring it to, is this the Bach Cello Suites piece that you're working on? Yeah. So could you talk to us a little bit about that? And I know you also have a summer intensive, which I think is at the Dance Centre. I'd love for you to include that in the discussion. So away you go, Idan. What's coming up for you at the Dance Centre?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Bach Dances project that is based on Johann Sebastian Bach's famous solo cello suites. We're doing suite 1, 2, 3. And this is one of those projects that have been simmering for quite a few years now. I reached out to Early Music Vancouver, and, for those in the community who are not familiar with the organization, we have the privilege of having a world-class early music entity in Vancouver. And they have agreed to take part of this project with Naissance and the Dance Centre, who has given us a very generous artist in residence agreement and a presentation. The work will premiere in August 1st, and it will be a part of Early Music Vancouver's Summer Festival. And as a part of that festival, we're also offering a series of workshops and lectures and Q&As for the community that is really geared towards all of the subjects that you and I have spoken about in this conversation. So how do we collaborate? How do we address a monumental piece of the past and give it a contemporary perspective or life? How do dancers work with live musicians? The cellist that we're going to work with is Eleanor Frey, who's based in Toronto and is really a world-renowned cellist. So it's a really exciting and wonderful opportunity to dive into this project. We're starting rehearsals in February, so quite soon. And as a part of the Discover Dance series in March 5th, we'll be presenting excerpts of work that would be, still in the making, still a work in progress, as well as parts of recent work that I've created with Leslie Dalla, Philip Glass solo piano sonatas, even some excerpts of a contemporary piece that is a part of a project that we did of Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire this summer in Quebec City with Opéra de Quebec. So it's going to be a conversation with myself and the artists and the sharing of the type of work that we do at Naissance.
Wonderful. That's so wonderful. So very excited for all of that. And so what do you envision for your work and for Naissance going forward, like over the next 5 years? Obviously, you have a national and international tour that takes you into some of that. You've mentioned the theatre piece that you may be directing. Is that what it looks like for you for the next 5 years?
I'm very excited to say that, in the next few years, there's a really nice combination of, I would say, mid-scaled work and grand operas. Mm-hmm. So right now I'm really invested in our Bach Dances project. It occupies my days in a real intense way, which I love. It's really my favorite part of diving into these worlds. But in the next season, I'll be directing La Traviata for Vancouver Opera.
Fabulous.
And Pacific Opera. Victoria is also going to present that, so that would be a production with dancers and, of course, what we call grand opera. Mm-hmm. And there's quite a few other productions that are already simmering, and sometimes some of them are already in the fundraising phase of it.
Wonderful.
So I'm looking forward for a very exciting next few years.
Yeah, that is so wonderful with all the work that you've put in and everything that you have there to offer. I think it's just really wonderful, so deserved, and it's so lovely to think that of the different scales too, because I think seeing your work in an intimate setting is also so beautiful and so kind of all consuming. And I think being able to experience it at those different scales is, brings us closer to you. So that's so wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Idan. This has been so wonderful. Just opened so many conversations that we could have going forward. But exactly.
We must.
So after all this time, it'd be lovely to see you in the flesh. So well, all my love, best of luck, and thank you again so much. Thank you so much for listening. We would love for you to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, as this will help other listeners find us and help us to grow our dance audience. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook at The Dance Centre, Twitter at Dance Centre, and Instagram at The Dance Centre BC. And if you'd like to support our work, please consider making a donation. Just go to our website at thedancecentre.ca, where you'll find extensive information about our upcoming programs and events. The music for the Dance Centre podcast was composed by James B. Maxwell. Always a pleasure to connect with you through dance. Until next time.